Welcome to Idlewild Cottage, a quiet place where kindred spirits can linger together over a cup of tea, savoring all things lovely and cozy. My name is Juliana, and I'm delighted to have you. Each episode here at the cottage will center around a theme. That theme will be celebrated in a number of ways, through literature, art, nature, and even some favorite movie scenes. We'll cherish the sweet and simple things of life. So make yourself at home, and I'll put the kettle on. The snowball bushes are in bloom throughout our neighborhood right now, which always has a way of transporting me to my childhood. We had a lovely snowball bush in our backyard, and it made the most delightfully dappled playhouse. It was just large enough that I could tuck my whole 5-year-old self underneath its blooming boughs, but small enough that it felt as though I had been swept into the sweetest secret, known only to myself and any dolls I might have brought along. Ah, such are the delights of childhood playhouses and fairy worlds. Today marks the last episode in our spring series. Now, I'm not entirely sure what this summer and the future of Idlewild Cottage will look like. So in the meantime, I'd love to leave you with a tribute to several sweet childhood haunts and hideaways in literature. We'll begin, most fittingly, with Anne Shirley's very own Idlewild, which, as you may have guessed, is the inspiration behind the name of this podcast. In this scene from Anne of Green Gables, Anne proceeds to chatter for 10 minutes by the clock, according to Marilla, as she describes the fun she and Diana have. Oh, we do have such elegant times, Marilla. I have to furnish most of the imagination, but I'm well able to do that. Diana is simply perfect in every other way. You know that little piece of land across the brook that runs up between our farm and Mr. Barry's? Right in the corner there is a little ring of white birch trees, the most romantic spot, Marilla. Diana and I have our playhouse there. We call it Idlewild. Isn't that a poetical name? I assure you it took me some time to think it out. I stayed awake nearly a whole night before I invented it. Then, just as I was dropping off to sleep, it came like an inspiration. Diana was enraptured when she heard it. We have got our house fixed up elegantly. You must come and see it, Marilla. We have great big stones all covered with moss for seats, and boards from tree to tree for shelves. And we have all our dishes on them. Of course, they're all broken, but it's the easiest thing in the world to imagine that they are whole. There's a piece of a plate with a spray of red and yellow ivy on it that is especially beautiful. We keep it in the parlor, and we have the fairy glass there, too. The fairy glass is as lovely as a dream. Diana found it out in the woods behind their chicken house. It's all full of rainbows, just little young rainbows that haven't grown big yet. And Diana's mother told her it was broken off a hanging lamp they once had. But it's nice to imagine the fairies lost it one night when they had a ball, so we call it the fairy glass. With such an imagination, it comes as no surprise that Anne's children, too, are drawn to idyllic haunts and hideaways. We are swept into their land of play through the 7th book in the Anne series, Rainbow Valley. In daytime, the Blythe children liked very well to play in the rich, soft greens and glooms of the big maple grove, but for evening revels, there was no place like the little valley behind the maple grove. It was a fairy realm of romance to them. The valley was full of dear, friendly hollows, and the largest of these was their favorite stamping ground. Here they were assembled on this particular evening, along the bank of the brook. Jem was at present busily occupied in frying a mess of small trout which he had just caught in the pond. His stove consisted of a circle of red stones with a fire kindled in it, and his culinary utensils were an old tin can, hammered out flat, and a fork with only one tine left. Meanwhile, Nan had produced the banquet board, a board literally as well as figuratively. It was converted into a table by propping it on 2 large mossy stones. Newspapers served as tablecloth, and broken plates and handleless cups furnished the dishes. The brook gave Adam's ale of unsurpassed crystal. For the rest, there was a certain sauce compounded of fresh air and appetite of youth, which gave to everything a divine flavor. To sit in Rainbow Valley, steeped in a twilight half gold, half amethyst, rife with the odors of balsam fir and woodsy growing things in their springtime prime, with the sound of the wind and tinkle of bells in the shaking treetops, and eat fried trout and dry bread, was something which the mighty of earth might have envied them. Laura and Mary Ingalls dream up an outdoor playland, too, in which we see the girls' ingenuity in keeping house with the things available to them. I can imagine their joy in being given barely broken bits of china with which to adorn their oak-dappled haunt in Little House in the Big Woods. They had playhouses under the 2 big oak trees in front of the house. Mary's playhouse was under Mary's tree, and Laura's playhouse was under Laura's tree. The soft grass made a green carpet for them. The green leaves were the roofs, and through them they could see bits of the blue sky. Pa made a swing of tough bark and hung it to a large, low branch of Laura's tree. It was her swing because it was in her tree, but she had to be unselfish and let Mary swing in it whenever she wanted to. Mary had a cracked saucer to play with, and Laura had a beautiful cup with only one big piece broken out of it. Charlotte and Nettie and the 2 little wooden men Pa had made lived in the playhouse with them. Every day they made fresh leaf hats for Charlotte and Nettie, and they made little leaf cups and saucers to set on their table. The table was a nice, smooth rock. Now, outdoor playhouses are lovely in fine weather, but what might make an ideal space for indoor entertainment? We look to the Melody Children of Elizabeth Enright's 1941 book, The Saturdays, for inspiration. The room in which they were sitting might have been called a playroom, schoolroom, or nursery by most people, but to the Melodies it was known as the office. It was at the very top of the house so that they could make almost all the noise they wanted to, and it had everything such a room should have: a skylight and 4 windows facing east and north, and a fireplace with a basket-shaped grate. The floor was covered with scarred red linoleum that didn't matter, and the yellow walls were encrusted with hundreds of indispensable objects: bookcases bursting with books, pictures both by the Melody Children and less important grown-up artists, a shelf of dolls in varying degrees of decay, coats and hats hanging on pegs, and other articles too numerous to mention. In one corner of the room stood an old upright piano that always looked offended for some reason, and whose rack was littered with sheets of music all patched and held together with Scotch tape. In addition to various chairs, tables, and toy cupboards, there was a big dingy sofa with busted springs, a blackboard, a trapeze, and a pair of rings. That was all, but I think you will agree that it was enough. The office was their pride and joy. This inviting attic room reminds me of a favorite setting in a 1938 Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant movie called The Holiday. The Seton family home is simply oozing with signs of wealth and formal living, but it is most often to the old upstairs playroom that the now-grown children still find themselves drawn. This is a cozy room where they can be themselves, with couches one can really lounge on, instruments one can really play, and even a trapeze on which one can really swing. In a couple of scenes, we even find Hepburn, Grant, and company dipping into their various vaudeville roots to entertain their guests with music and gymnastics. Now, as we look to the ever-industrious March sisters, which we absolutely must, we could land on any number of special playhouses or secret hideaways, from the garret, where the girls meet for their Pickwick Club, to the apple orchard, where they imagine themselves riding their faithful steed, Ellen Tree. But for today, we'll join the girls on their outing to another haunt, the Delectable Mountain. In fact, as we close our time together today, Let's imagine ourselves toting tea things and work baskets away from Idlewild Cottage toward the delectable mountain where we will join the girls. Let's approach from Laurie's point of view in Chapter 13 of Little Women. Here's a landscape, thought Laurie, peeping through the bushes. It was a rather pretty little picture, for the girls sat together in the shady nook with sun and shadow flickering over them, the aromatic wind lifting their hair. Meg sat upon her cushion sewing daintily and looking as fresh and sweet as a rose in her pink dress among the green. Beth was sorting the cones that lay thick under the hemlock nearby, for she made pretty things with them. Amy was sketching a group of ferns, and Jo was knitting as she read aloud. Beth looked up, espied Laurie's wistful face behind the birches, and beckoned with a reassuring smile. "May I come in, please, or shall I be a bother?" he asked, advancing slowly. Meg lifted her eyebrows, but Jo scowled at her defiantly and said at once, "Of course you may. We should have asked you before, only we thought you wouldn't care for such a girl's game as this." "I always like your games, but if Meg doesn't want me, I'll go away." "I've no objection if you do something. It's against the rules to be idle here," replied Meg gravely but graciously. "Much obliged. I'll do anything if you'll let me stop a bit. Shall I sew, read, cone, draw, or do all at once?" And Laurie sat down with a submissive expression delightful to behold. "Finish this story while I set my heel," said Jo, handing him the book. "Yes'm," was the meek answer as he began, doing his best to prove his gratitude for the favor of admission into the Busy Bee Society. The story was not a long one, and when it was finished, he ventured to ask a few questions. "Please, ma'am, could I inquire if this highly instructive and charming institution is a new one?" Jo goes on to explain the inspiration behind their gathering. "Well, we have tried not to waste our holiday, but each has had a task and worked at it with a will. Mother likes to have us out of doors as much as possible, so we bring our work here and have nice times. For the fun of it, we bring our things in these bags, wear the old hats, use poles to climb the hill, and play pilgrims as we used to do years ago. We call this hill the Delectable Mountain, for we can look far away and see the country where we hope to live sometime." Jo pointed, and through an opening in the wood, one could look across the wide blue river, the meadows on the other side, far over the outskirts of the great city, to the green hills that rose to meet the sky. The sun was low, and the heavens glowed with splendor. Gold and purple clouds lay on the hilltops, and rising high into the ruddy light were silvery white peaks that shone like the airy spires of some celestial city. I love the imagery of the March girls climbing the hill with their little bundles, playing at Pilgrim's Progress. In an earlier chapter, we learned that they used to imagine that their bundles were burdens, tumbling off down the stairs. There's something about each of the childhood lands we've looked at today that represents some burden being released. In these lands, our literary friends are free to truly be themselves, free to shed the burdens of responsibility and care, chores and schoolwork, even if only for an hour or two. Kindred spirits, whether our young hearts are more drawn today toward a woodsy kind of fairyland filled with whispering winds and babbling brooks, or to a cozy playroom stuffed with fluffy chairs, wall-to-wall books, and red linoleum that doesn't matter, would we feel the lifting of burdens as we remember the one who walks beside us? As Psalm 55:22 says, "Give your burdens to the Lord, and He will take care of you." Thank you for joining me today, dear ones. Please come again soon to Idlewild Cottage.